I still remember the sound the doors made when they closed behind me. Not a slam, a click, quiet, final, like a vault ceiling shut, locking away everything I'd ever known. That's the moment I understood what it meant to be erased. Welcome back to those who've been riding with us, and if you're new here, welcome. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. This channel tells stories that hit home, stories about people who had to lose everything to find themselves. If that resonates, you know what to do. The chandelier had cast sharp shadows across the mahogany table. Sterling Whitmore III sat at the head, silver hair perfect, expression carved from granite. 4 generations of senators stared down from oil paintings on the walls. My mother, Blythe, sat beside him, hands folded, knuckles white. My sister Holiday watched me with eyes that held both fear and admiration. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but nothing prepared me for the weight of it. Generations pressing down on my shoulders, bloodline demanding submission. "You will not embarrass this family," my father said. His voice was calm. That made it more terrifying. Sterling Whitmore III never raised his voice. He didn't need to. I stood at my place, hands steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I'm not running for Senate, Father." The silence that followed was profound. Even the servants seemed to pause in adjacent rooms. Sterling's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "You're walking away from your birthright. You're walking away from everything we've built," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. I found my strength then. "No, Mother. I'm walking toward something that matters." For months, I'd been developing a vision, a national mental health access program, free clinics in underserved communities, places where people were dying not from lack of care, but from lack of access. The Whitmores believed in influence through power, political appointments, endowments with naming rights, quiet conversations in wood-paneled rooms where laws were shaped before votes. I believed in influence through impact, concrete help for concrete people, clinics that stayed open late, removing barriers between suffering and healing. 2 philosophies, 1 family name. Sterling set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. "You choose this," he said, words cold as New England marble, "and you are no longer a Whitmore." I'd expected anger, arguments, not the surgical precision of disownment. "Then I'll build something without the name." The portraits on the walls seemed to lean in, dead senators watching their legacy fracture in real time. I turned and walked toward the doors. My footsteps echoed on hardwood floors my great-grandfather had imported from France. "Alaric," Holiday's voice, soft but urgent. I paused but didn't turn around. "Be brilliant," she whispered. Those 2 words. From my sister. The only encouragement I'd get. I walked out without looking back. The doors closed behind me with that sound, like a vault ceiling. The inheritance, the trust funds, the political connections, the Whitmore name. All of it. Gone. I stood on the steps in the November cold, breath visible in the air. Behind me, everything I'd ever known. Ahead of me, nothing but uncertainty. And somehow, I felt lighter than I had in years. The press devoured the story like wolves on wounded prey. Whitmore heir goes rogue. Family rift over radical agenda. Boston dynasty cuts ties with rebellious son. Sterling gave exactly 1 interview to the Boston Globe. His statement carefully crafted to distance the family brand from what he called unfortunate idealism. The subtext was clear. I was unstable, impractical, no longer associated with the family's values. The machinery of power moved quickly. Trust funds I'd never touched but always assumed would be there, frozen. Access to the family's network of political connections, business relationships, social capital, revoked. The apartment in Beacon Hill that had been in my name, reclaimed. Within a week, I went from heir to one of Boston's most powerful families, to a man with a modest savings account, a radical dream, and exactly one ally. Tavian Cross, my best friend since Georgetown. We met in a D.C. coffee shop where I'd just signed the lease on a one-bedroom apartment. The neighborhood would have horrified my mother. Tavian slid a cup of coffee across the table. "You just walked away from billions," he said. I smiled faintly. For the first time in weeks, it was genuine. I walked away from a leash. "Noble," Tavian said, "also insane." "Probably both." He leaned back, studying me. "So what now?" We started small. One clinic in Southeast D.C., where the statistics were brutal. High poverty, higher suicide rates. Virtually no mental health infrastructure. We operated out of a renovated community center. 2 therapists, 1 part-time psychiatrist, a sliding fee scale that went all the way down to 0. The need was immediate and overwhelming. People lined up before we opened the doors. Then we opened a second clinic in Baltimore. For 6 months, momentum built. I worked 18-hour days, meeting with community leaders, recruiting staff, writing grant proposals. I learned to navigate bureaucracy without the Whitmore name opening doors. I learned what it meant to hear no from people who owed me nothing. But funding was precarious. Banks refused loans once they discovered my identity. The Whitmore disownment had become a story about instability. A privileged son throwing a tantrum. Risk assessment departments flagged my applications. Donors who'd initially expressed interest quietly withdrew after receiving calls from Boston. Everywhere I went, the shadow of my family name followed. Not as support, as sabotage. I was branded unstable, naive, rebellious. A man who couldn't maintain relationships with his own family, how could he be trusted with other people's money? But the clinics kept operating. Barely. On shoestring budgets and staff who believed in the mission more than the salary. Therapists who stayed late without overtime pay. Psychiatrists who donated hours. Community volunteers who answered phones and filed paperwork. Slowly, quietly, people began to notice. Not the power brokers. The people the power brokers never noticed. Mothers who brought their teenagers in. Veterans who finally asked for help. Teachers who referred struggling students. I remember standing in our second clinic late one evening. The last patient had just left. A woman who'd been contemplating suicide 2 months earlier. She'd hugged me before walking out. "Thank you for being here," she'd said. 4 words. Tavian found me still standing there, staring at nothing. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, we're doing something real." He smiled. "Yeah, we are. Now let's figure out how to keep doing it without going bankrupt." Just as momentum began building, the article dropped. Washington Political Insider ran a front-page story. Whitmore nonprofit plagued by financial mismanagement. I was in my apartment at 2 in the morning when Tavian called. "You need to see this. Now." My hands shook as I read it. The article cited anonymous sources within the organization, detailed supposed irregularities in accounting, suggested donations were being misused, implied my inexperience was putting vulnerable communities at risk. It was a masterpiece of innuendo, specific enough to sound credible, vague enough to be impossible to immediately disprove. By morning, the foundation that had expressed genuine interest pulled out. The Congresswoman's office stopped returning calls. 2 major donors demanded audits. A 3rd clinic we'd been planning, permits suddenly delayed. Partners who'd committed staff, suddenly unavailable. The coordinated timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Tavian was on his phone for 3 days straight, calling contacts, tracing the whisper trail. The anonymous sources didn't exist. They were fabrications based on information that could only have come from someone with access to the Whitmore family's network. The trail led to Senator Magnus Alder, a longtime family ally, a man who'd attended Sterling's fundraisers for 2 decades, who sat on boards with my mother, who'd been photographed cutting ribbons with my father. "It's him," Tavian said, showing me the evidence. "Magnus Alder leaked false information to the press." I stared at the senator's photo on the screen. The message was clear: return to the family, bend the knee, or be buried publicly. They're not just cutting you off, Tavian said quietly. They're making sure you fail. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I need to go to Boston. If this story is hitting different, take a minute and subscribe. You won't regret it. I didn't call ahead. Sterling was in his study where 4 generations of Whitmore men had made their important decisions. Leather-bound books chosen for their spines rather than their contents lined the walls. He didn't look up from his papers when I walked in. "You're destroying my life," I said. He kept writing. "You're destroying our legacy." "For helping people?" Finally, he looked up. "For weakening the brand." That word landed like a slap. Brand. Not family. Not values. Not legacy in any meaningful sense. Brand. "You think you're noble," Sterling said, "fighting for something pure. But you're naive. Power isn't evil, Alaric. It's necessary. And you threw it away for sentiment." "I threw it away for humanity." He leaned back in his chair. "Humanity doesn't remember sentiment. It remembers names on buildings, laws passed, institutions built. You're building nothing but poverty-level clinics that will close the moment you run out of money." I looked at him. This man who'd taught me to tie a bow tie, who'd attended every school performance, who'd seemed, once upon a time, capable of love. And I realized something fundamental. I had never been a son. I had been an asset, an investment in the family's future returns. When I stopped performing according to expectations, the investment was liquidated. "Withdraw the attacks," I said, "or I'll go public with everything, every dirty play, every manipulation." Sterling smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "No one will believe you. You're the unstable son who walked away from billions. I'm the patriarch of a respected family. Who do you think has credibility?" I left without another word. On the train back to D.C., I stared out the window. Something inside me shifted. I'd been trying to prove myself to my family. I needed to prove myself to everyone else. Dr. Isolde Mercer built her reputation on evidence, not emotion. A public health advocate with a Ph.D. from Johns Hopkins. 20 years of fieldwork in underserved communities. The kind of credibility that couldn't be bought or fabricated. When she read the article about my supposed financial mismanagement, she did what she always did. She investigated, called the clinics directly, spoke to staff members, reviewed the actual financial records I made available to her in full. She found exactly what she expected. A lean, ethical operation doing extraordinary work with minimal resources. She went on PBS NewsHour, methodically dismantled every claim in the Political Insider article, laid out real numbers, presented testimonials from patients, proved with surgical precision that the accusations were false. "What we have here is not financial mismanagement," she said, looking directly into the camera. "What we have is a targeted attack on an initiative that threatens the comfortable narrative." Public sentiment began to shift. Then something unexpected happened. A video appeared on social media. A mother speaking through tears in her kitchen. Voice breaking, but words clear. "My son didn't end his life because there wasn't help available. He ended it because he couldn't afford the help that existed." She wiped her eyes. "The Whitmore Clinic gave him 3 months of free therapy. 3 months where he smiled again, where he talked about the future. He didn't make it, but those 3 months mattered. They mattered to him. They mattered to me." The video was raw, unpolished, devastating. It went viral. Within 48 hours, 20 million views. Then the flood began. Not from foundations or wealthy donors or political allies, from teachers who sent $20, veterans who sent $50, nurses who sent whatever they could spare from their paychecks, people who understood what it meant to need help and not be able to afford it. Tavian came into my office with his laptop. "You need to see this." The donations were still coming in. A crowdfunding campaign had raised $2 million in a week. I stared at the screen. Small donations. Thousands of them. Then tens of thousands. They believe in this, Tavian said quietly. They believe in themselves, I corrected. We're just making it possible. The movement was no longer about me. It was about need. Raw, human need. And need doesn't bow to pedigree. More videos surfaced. A veteran talking about his PTSD treatment. A teenager describing how therapy saved her from self-harm. A single father grateful his daughter could see a counselor after his divorce. Each story authentic. Each story powerful. The narrative shifted from unstable heir to grassroots movement. News outlets that had run the hit piece now scrambled to cover the human interest angle. I sat in our main clinic watching the evening news. They were interviewing Dr. Mercer again. This is what healthcare reform looks like from the ground up, she said. Not top-down policy, bottom-up necessity. A reporter asked her about me. Alaric Whitmore is doing what the system failed to do. He's making care accessible, and he's doing it despite institutional resistance. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Keep going. Don't let them win. A friend in Boston. I looked around the clinic. The walls covered with children's drawings. Thank you notes from families. Photos of staff and patients at community events. This wasn't about redemption anymore. It wasn't about proving my father wrong. It was about the woman who'd hugged me after her last session, the veteran who finally slept through the night, the teenager who stopped cutting. These were the people who mattered. These were the lives that made everything worthwhile, and they were multiplying. 5 years later. The Whitmore Mental Health Initiative operated clinics in 38 states. Federal legislation had passed with bipartisan support, matching funds for community mental health programs that met specific accessibility standards. I stood in the White House Rose Garden on a bright October morning, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The citation read, "For transformative contributions to mental health accessibility and for demonstrating that public service requires not position, but purpose." I thought about that November evening when the doors closed behind me. Sterling watched from his study in Boston. The television was on, but muted. He sat in the leather chair that had belonged to his father and his father before him, watching his disowned son receive the nation's highest civilian honor. The irony was not lost on him. The Whitmore name was now attached to something that would outlive them all, not because of inheritance, not because of political maneuvering or endowments, because of impact. Because one man chose people over pedigree. Sterling picked up his phone, started to dial my number. His finger hovered over the call button. Then he set it down. Some distances were too far to cross, even with good intentions arriving years too late. He looked at the portraits on his walls. 4 generations of senators, all their power, all their influence, all their carefully constructed legacy, and none of it would matter as much as what his son had built. Reporters clustered around me after the ceremony. "How does it feel to redeem the family legacy?" one asked. I paused, considering the question. The easy answer would be vindication, to say I'd proven my father wrong, to take satisfaction in the reversal of fortune. But that wasn't the truth. "I didn't redeem it," I said softly, but clearly. "I redefined it." The reporters scribbled in their notebooks, but I was looking past them at Tavian, at Dr. Mercer, at the staff who'd come to witness this. Real quick, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This story isn't over yet. 2 years after the Medal of Freedom ceremony, Holiday called. "He wants to see you." Sterling had fallen ill. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, timeline measured in months. "Does he?" I asked. "Or do you want me to see him?" "Both," she admitted. I returned to Boston on a gray afternoon in March. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Same portraits, same rugs, same curtains. But it felt diminished, as if the power it once held had leaked away. Sterling sat in the sunroom wrapped in a blanket. Heat turned up despite the warmth. He'd lost weight. His hands trembled slightly. Those hands that had always been so steady, signing legislation, shaking hands with senators. "You came," he said. "Holiday asked," I replied, sitting across from him. Silence hung between us, years of words unspoken like fog in the air. Outside, the garden where I'd played as a child looked overgrown, neglected. "I was wrong," Sterling said finally. The words came out quiet, reluctant, pulled from some deep place where he'd buried them. Hard words for a proud man. "You chose posterity over pride. You chose to build something that would last beyond your lifetime." He coughed, recovered. "I spent my life protecting a name. You created something worthy of one." I looked at this diminished version of the Titan who'd once erased me with a single pronouncement. "No," I said gently. "I chose people. That's all I ever wanted to do." Sterling nodded slowly. "I would have been proud. If I had let myself be." "I know," I said, and strangely I meant it. We talked for another hour, not about the past. That territory was too mined with regret. Instead, we talked about the work. Sterling asked questions about the clinics, the legislation, the sustainability models, his political mind still sharp even as his body failed. When I left, he said, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something. Sterling Whitmore III passed away 3 weeks later. The funeral was held at Trinity Church in Boston. Senators, business leaders, society figures filled the pews. The eulogies painted him as a statesman, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. I sat in the front row beside my mother and Holiday. Blythe maintained her elegant composure throughout. Black dress, pearls, perfect posture, but her hand found mine during the final prayer. She squeezed once, a silent acknowledgement of something neither of us would say aloud. The family gathered in the lawyer's office a week later. An elderly man who'd served the Whitmores for 40 years opened the document with ceremonial precision. The estate was vast. Investments, properties, accounts spread across decades of careful financial management. Most went to Blythe as expected. Holiday received the house and a substantial trust. Then the lawyer paused. He looked at me over his reading glasses. My stomach tightened. "To my son, Alaric Boone Whitmore," he read, "I leave the majority of my discretionary estate to be placed in a permanent endowment funding the Whitmore Mental Health Initiative in perpetuity." The room went silent. The amount was staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars. "There is no letter," the lawyer added. "No explanation. Just the designation." I sat very still. Blythe spoke first. "He never said anything to me about this. He changed the will 6 weeks ago. It was his last official act." I understood then. No apology letter, no deathbed confession seeking absolution, just a final decision. Perhaps Sterling's way of saying what he never could in life, that he'd been wrong, that I'd been right, that some legacies are worth more than family pride. Or perhaps it was simpler. Perhaps he'd simply recognized where the money would do the most good. Either way, it was enough. The Boone Center for Mental Health opened in Boston on a sunny day in May. The building stood in Roxbury, a neighborhood neglected by the city's power structures for generations. Modern structure, all glass and light, designed to feel welcoming rather than institutional. The sign above the entrance read, "The Boone Center for Mental Health, founded by Alaric Boone Whitmore." My middle name, the one my mother had chosen. Not the dynasty name, the personal one given in love rather than legacy. Holiday stood beside me at the ribbon cutting. She looked at the building with undisguised pride. "You didn't just survive being disowned," she said quietly. I smiled, watching as the first families entered the center, a mother with 2 children, an elderly man moving slowly with a cane, a young woman who looked exhausted but hopeful. "No," I said. "I outlived it." The ribbon was cut. The center opened its doors. And somewhere in the parts of the city where power had never bothered to look, people found help. 10 years after the Boone Center opened, I gave a commencement address at a small state university, large population of first-generation college students. They thought my story might resonate. Near the end of my speech, I said something that captured everything I'd learned. Some legacies are inherited. They are given to you by virtue of birth, by the accident of family name. I paused, looking at the sea of graduates. Those legacies are easy to carry. They require only that you not drop them. Image prompt. Man at wooden podium on outdoor graduation stage, speaking to crowd of graduates in caps and gowns, university banners visible, spring day, trees in background, mid-speech gesture, engaged audience, professional but warm delivery, connection with listeners. But the greatest legacies are built. They are constructed from choices made when no one is watching, from work done when no one is applauding. The graduates leaned forward. From the stubborn insistence that your life should mean something beyond yourself. Those legacies are hard to build. They require everything you have. I looked past the reporters to the back of the auditorium. Tavian stood with Dr. Mercer. Staff from the clinics had gathered. The people who'd built this thing alongside me were smiling. Not the Whitmore family, my family, the one I had chosen, the one that had chosen me back. But they are the only ones that truly belong to you, and they are the only ones that last. The graduates stood and applauded. That's the story. If it moved you, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Let me know what you think about choosing your own path over the one laid out for you. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and stay connected, because we've got more stories coming that'll make you think. See you in the next one.